a vast mass of celestial beings. Buddhism has its Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Arhats. And nearly all religions and philosophies have behind the visible orders of things the concept of an invisible government, a government which controls all things, because it is by its very substance and essence in full possession of everything necessary for absolute leadership. All of this type of philosophy has gradually resulted in what we might term religious art. And this religious art is not limited to strange peoples far away. It is present in our own cathedrals and churches. Religious art is present in many private homes. Wonderful figures and representations of sacred persons or sanctified individuals are to be found in painting and in sculpturing in our own local environment. How then does it happen that we create this imagery? Artists, particularly in the early period of Gothic art in Europe, invented a complete language of symbolical attributes by means of which it would be possible to distinguish the degrees of sanctity or divinity present in the various representations that they made. Whether it is the great Michelangelo's Moses or the tremendous symbolical value of the Raphael and Rembrandt sacred paintings, it's always the same. A sacred picture to represent an invisible principle. Now, this is also the only way that we can represent the various virtues and vices of humanity. How are we going to define generosity to a person who has no understanding of the word? The only way we can understand under those conditions is through an action. And so we have the various parables and legends of Scriptures. The Good Samaritan represents this kind of generosity. The wayward son who finally comes home to his family is in the parable of the prodigal son. Well, these are word patterns created to express virtues which are common to human beings, but which cannot be communicated without some relationship to a practical action. As we go into the pictures of religious personalities in all parts of the world, we are sometimes considerably confused. In many instances, it looks like some people have more of these images than might be necessary. We realize also that within cultures, these images change their appearances. They change the materials upon which or from which they are fashioned. They develop expressions and likenesses largely tribal or racial, and therefore differing in various areas and communities. Yet this tremendous, almost incalculable mass of sacred imagery is now becoming of great interest to not only the psychologist, but the anthropologist and the mystic, the metaphysician, and the symbolist in general, because these images tell us something. They tell us of man's eternal search for realities, and the very images which look unreal are part of this struggle to attain reality. Some time ago, an Indian gentleman, East Indian gentleman, was discussing with a missionary who was having a little difficulty trying to understand how this well-cultured Indian gentleman was able to respect an image with a number of arms and several heads. So he tried to explain this to the missionary. And he said, how now would you do some of these things? Suppose we say that a horse has a head, and a dog has a head, and a bird has a head, and a fish has a head. Now all these heads are parts of something. They are parts of life. All of these creatures are alive. One life is within them. Therefore, if we want to make a picture of life, we must make a cluster of living things to represent it. And no matter how many of these we put together or pile up, they will not be adequate, because there will be more kinds of life than we can picture. There will be more attitudes and virtues within human life than we can depict. Therefore, the only thing we can do is to suggest that the divine power, the source of things, animates all life. And therefore, if we try to picture it, perhaps we should picture it made up of living things. In Egypt, the Serapean deity in the great Alexandrian library, the Serapeum, is said to have been a deity, a figure, made of a kind of wickerwork. And within that wickerwork were all forms of life, plants, flowers, symbols of animals and birds, all kinds of things. It was a wickerwork filled with every type of life that the Egyptians could put in it. Therefore, to them, it seemed perfectly appropriate that this should represent the spirit of life, a spirit moving through living things, a spirit that should remind us forever of the unity of life and our own kinship with living things. So gradually it became increasingly practical, apparently, to create this elaborate pictorial representation of the various activities of natural law. In Alexandria, the astronomers tried to do this with the universe. The Brahmins perhaps did a little better at it, but all of them came to the realization that the universe was in some way an archetypal figure, a pattern, a picture. And if we wanted to picture the divine power, the source of life, what more adequate immediate symbol could be available than the solar system, the cosmos? There would be no way in which we could go beyond life. But everything we can reach is part of life. Therefore, life expands and extends. And as the Brahmins pointed out, the main problem with imagery is that it is inadequate. It is not that we have too much of it. It is that we cannot possibly have an imagery structure that is complete in all of its attributes. There was only a step then to take language as an example. Language was a way of putting forms into words and transmitting them. Language could go on and on and on, and never could we have enough words or enough language symbols to take care of everything we wanted to record. In the 15th and 16th century, the Unabridged Dictionary was a very slender little volume in English. Today it is an inconceivably complicated volume. And still there are not enough words to tell all that we know. In the same way, there are not enough symbols in nature to tell all that we believe about creation, about deity, about the infinite unfoldment of living things. So we find in the Greek and other religions also the gradual development of mythologies. These mythologies were stories about the gods, or about spirits or ghosts or superphysical beings of one kind or another. Now, in mythology, how were we going to symbolize the processes by means of which the various unfoldments of life took place? To the ancient people, without exception, generation was the most important symbol that existed to their knowledge, for it was a way in which life was perpetuated. It was the one way in which the mystery of death is solved forever in eternal life. Therefore, all the processes of creation that we might now carry on in a laboratory by means of chemicals or mathematical symbols were anciently represented by the ordinary activities of human life. Therefore, to the primitive people, deity was a tribal chieftain. Now, they knew he